We're going to start this painting by spritzing our paper just a little bit, and then we're going to use our quinacridone violet. With that violet, I'm just going to take my round brush and thinking about the tree line, painting in my tree line, and also leaving some negative space for the sky. Spritzing a little bit so I can soften those edges. Now when you spritz, make sure that you're not pulling the trigger all the way down, but just a little bit. Now going back in and getting some quinacridone gold, using that right on top of some of the violet that I just placed. And this is going to add some contrast. It's also going to add another layer of depth to your painting. So this would be considered probably another row of trees. It could also be some cliffs or possibly some ground. But right now I'm just thinking about layering the colors. I'm not thinking about details. Coming back in with some of the violet. Basically, you're just playing around with the paint. You're looking at the shapes that you're creating and mainly building up those contrasts, but not thinking details right now. Spritzing the bottom just a little bit, and this time I'm pulling it handle a little bit farther so that it will actually allow the paint to drip down. And that's going to help with some of that lower area and building up some interest with some shapes and some color down in that lower area. Going back over the top with some more violet. As I noticed, once I do the spritzing on the bottom, the colors are not as bright at the top, so I'm just reinforcing those colors on the top. I'm coming back in with some blue. Taking the blue and the paper on the top is a little bit damp. So when I'm adding the blue on the top, I'm making sure to leave a space in between the colors I already have down there and the blue. But I'm also thinking about cloud shapes and what a sky looks like, keeping it simple, not necessarily drawing clouds, but thinking about the white, the negative space being clouds. Continue to add some color just to add interest. Thinking about possibly where do I want to add a little bit more of the violet? Where do I want to put a little bit more of the gold? Being careful not to make it muddy, because right now I really want those colors to stand out. Not mixing them together. Noticing how I'm just tapping the paper. Now I've dried my brush off and I'm soaking up some of that extra paint. To do that, I've dried my paintbrush completely off, and in between times that I'm soaking up the paint, I make sure that I wipe it off to get all that extra paint off of there. Now I'm probably going to let this dry overnight, and that way I can use the watercolor pencil. The next step is my favorite. Just looking at the painting and seeing what you can see. Look for trees. Look for anything that might be part of a landscape. But the main thing is, see if there's foreground, middle ground, background. So I've chosen my watercolor pencils that I want to use that are about the same colors as the paint I was using. And now I'm starting to look for those items. And the first thing I'm starting on is the center of interest that I've noticed. Now we've talked a little bit about that rule of thirds, and this specific tree is right there on that line where that rule of third is going to intersect right across that third section of the painting. I'm using the violet because that's the color that the paint is, but I'm coming in and I'm adding the details of the trees. Now I'm not just making these up. I have some photographs of trees that are right next to me so that I can look at them and kind of see what kind of branches they might have. Since I'm working in the background, I'm remembering that this is the farthest away, so things need to be small and they also need to be light. If I make it too dark, then it's not going to look like it has distance. I'm coming in with some of the gold now and just adding a little bit of color to the paint that is there. The fun thing about this is there's really no wrong way of doing this as long as you are um, coming up with specific things that would fit within a landscape. In the foreground, I thought that these shapes that were there kind of looked like rocks. So I used some of the darker values and started outlining the rocks. Again, I had some photographs of some rocks in the mountains that I was looking at to kind of see what the textures were like and also the shapes. Coming back and working a little bit more on that tree because I thought it needed to be taller and it needed to also be in front of that small row of trees that I have behind it. The perspective wasn't quite right on it at first until I had it in front of those. Now coming back in and kind of doing some coloring in on the rocks, a little bit with the gold to add unity. I didn't like that wash that was right there on the side, that backwash, so I covered it up with some violet. Also, this backwash is right here in the front. It was a big one, so I'm covering it up and turning it into a large rock. Then I'm taking my smallest round brush that I have and I just got it damp. I did not make it really wet because then it's going to be drippy and we don't want that. You're just wanting to activate the paint with just by having it a little bit wet. Now that area above the stones is dry, so I decided to do some drawing with white and making these small bushes, coming in with a darker color and making the branches on the bushes, and then using my brush to kind of activate the color around the outside to darken it. I'm remembering that the things in the front, I don't want to have a whole bunch of detail, but I think that this will add interest and allow your eyes to go up and to my center of interest, which is that large tree. I did some final contrast touch-ups, and there is the final painting.